Hey, kia ora, Helen Brums here, coming to you live from Sun City in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast, number 1351, Uncovering Cemetery Secrets. Well, if you're going to take a dirt nap, you got to know the secrets of the cemetery, right? Or maybe you could become a secret in the cemetery. There are all sorts of fun things that can be discovered in cemeteries. So, where do we begin? Well, to be honest, I love walking through cemeteries. I love looking at the the tombstones, the headstones, the gravestones. I love looking at them all, following and when I'm walking through, quite often I will see some names repeated, and then I wonder if they're related. And you can jot down names and birth dates and the information off the tombstones and everything else. And when you are copying these things down, make sure that you write it exactly as it is spelt or written, abbreviated, formatted on the headstone, because that could be a clue later on for things that you are looking for. If it is in a language that you don't know, if you come across a headstone in a language you don't know, go to the office and take a photo of it, and go to the office and ask them if they have a translation of what is on the tombstone, or if somebody there is able to translate what is written on the tombstone. So you get an English copy as well as the original photograph of whatever language the tombstone is in. Tombstones can tell lots of stories too. There are different things that you will note in cemeteries, depending which ones you go and visit. Now, some of them are very fun to go visit because of some of them just don't have normal headstones. I mean, if you go through Hollywood Forever Cemetery, there are a lot of famous people that are buried there. There are a lot of very unusual headstones that are there, or tombstones, or crypts, and a lot of stories and things. Some of my late husband's family is entombed there in one way or another, whereas their ashes, whether they're buried on the lawn, they're buried in the mausoleums. So whenever we would go and visit the cemetery, we'd go for a drive around and see if there were any new things that were added that we hadn't seen before, or would some monument would catch our attention. So, like, what's that for? And so we'd stop and go over and have a read. But the Hollywood Forever Cemetery has some great stories in there, and some great people in there as well, and some very interesting monuments, tombstones, crypts, inscriptions on some things. What's his name? The one that did Porky Pig and Bugs Bunny and all of that. And on his, it's just got, "That's all, folks." The favorite saying and that sort of thing. So there's things like that you can see. There's, is it Valentino's? That just popped into my head about the lady in black. I think it's Valentino's. There's a crypt on an island in the middle of a lake at the cemetery that has a path that goes out across the lake to this island in the middle. And there's always been this, and there's the mysterious lady in black. Nobody ever knew who she was. But every year on his birthday, there's a woman in black that walks across there, and I think it's just a single red rose that she leaves behind. Nobody knew. There are rumors as to who the person was, that when he passed, this woman in black would go and visit on his birthday. And it's been going on for years, and nobody ever found out who the woman in black was. She was just seen walking across, and would just disappear when people came around to look to find out, who are you? And she'd kind of go at times when the cemetery would be the most deserted. But yeah, so there's lots of different stories like that. There's all these uncovering cemetery secrets, and then there's things like who is in the grave, or the crypt, or the mausoleum. Who is actually in there? Because sometimes it might just have one person's name, but when you go to the cemetery office and you ask about that particular one, like I know in New Zealand, my mum and I went and visited the Karori Cemetery, because there's some of her side of the family and some of my dad's side of the family that are buried there. And we went up and we asked for the plot records, and we gave them the name of the people that we knew that were in the plot, because we were sort of taking pictures of the headstone and everything. First of all, we had to find out where the plot was. So we went in there to say, this is who we are looking for. If we could, could we please have a copy of the plot record and a map to show us where it is? Always ask for those things. You never know what you're going to get. And so they brought out the map, they went and looked up the records, and it was those little index cards at the time, the little index cards and the little card catalogs. It's now all online because I can go and search it from here in the US. I can search the cemetery. But at the time, it was all on index cards. And so she brings over the index card, and my mum just stands there very quietly, very patiently, and writes down every single word exactly as it was written. And there is a reason for that, because sometimes, you might think it might have Peter J. Smith, and you just say, oh, that was Peter John. It may not be Peter John. It could be Peter Jeffrey, or it could be Peter James. You don't know that. So you write exactly as it is, because you might think, oh yeah, that was Uncle Peter and his middle name was John. No, it may not have been Uncle Peter. It could have actually been another relative who was put into that plot. And then, of course, when you go and you see the actual headstone, tombstone, you're looking at it, and that person may not be listed. And you're like, well, where did he come from? So now you have a mystery to go and unravel, like, who is this person that is in there? There is one story my mum always tells me, and it's my great-grandmother, I think. She purchased the plot, and it's got, and on the plot record, it has who purchased the plot, when it was purchased, what type of plot it was. Like, is it for one person? Is it for two people? Is it a family plot? Is it for ashes only? That sort of stuff is written on there. But also, too, what else is written on that plot record is the times, the days, the dates of when the plot was opened, to add another coffin or to add ashes, and it tells you if it was a burial or ashes. And so you see that on the plot record. So the plot record is not just, this is the person who bought it, these are the people that are, and then this is the list of the people who's in there. It tells you what dates the plots were opened, and the dates of the burial or the interment of the ashes. So very good records, because that is also how you can find out. Mal Blanc, thank you, Katie Hunger. That's one that's all, folks, across his tombstone. Thank you, Katie. I appreciate that. Could not remember his name. So when you're looking at these records, and there was one, and it was my second great grandmother. I'm trying to remember it might have been my great grandmother. It was on my mother's side of the family. It was my second great grandmother. Just remember that now. And so, of course, she's buried there. One of her daughters married a guy that she did not like at all. Well, when he died, they put him in the plot with the mother-in-law who didn't like him. So now they are resting for eternity together. We discovered, and his name is not on the headstone, but we discovered that through the plot records. And that's when my mum went, oh, he's in there? And I went, what do you mean, oh, he's in there? She goes, your second great grandmother did not, no, it was great grandmother, sorry. Your great grandmother did not like him at all. She wanted nothing to do with him when he was alive. She wanted nothing. I said, well, I guess that kind of changed when he got dumped in there. But of course, when he died, his wife was still alive, and so they just opened up the family plot and stuck him in there, and not realizing how much it would upset the mother who had already passed. So you find out fun stories like that too. If there is a child who was stillborn, they may be in that plot as well. That they may have named the child or not named the child when it was stillborn, but it was buried in the plot with family. So that may be listed on the plot records as well. Sometimes on some plot records, that may have the cause of death. Not typically, but sometimes it's recorded on some. I have seen that on a couple of plot records as well. But just having fun. I don't know where I got my love for cemeteries from, but I just find them such a calming place to walk and just to wander. Even when I go and visit Brad's tombstones, when I go and visit Brad's grave, I like wandering around. And of course, last time I was there, I was horrified. Last time I was there, it was after his 5th anniversary of his passing. It was November last year, and I couldn't find his grave. I was horrified. I thought, this is the right place, because I knew the markers up on the road that goes around the cemetery. I knew where the markers were that marked the path that goes down where his grave is. And I'm walking down there, and I'm like, it's about here. and it should be here. And there was that, and there was his grave here, and then at the head of his grave and one over, there was this particular girl's and he was on a lawn area where they put all the headstones flat, and I couldn't find hers either, and I'm like, oh my god. And then I kept wondering, maybe I'm not down far enough, and I kept walking down, and I was like, no, I've gone too far. So for some reason, probably Brad pushing me, I walked over a little bit and then started walking up. And what had happened was that since I'd last been there had been somebody buried next to Brad, which is why I couldn't see his grave, because normally I come down the path and his is right there. But no, there was another one in its way. It was a massive piece of granite. It was huge. It covered the entire plot and had this woman on there with a picture of her, all of her family details and everything else. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if they ever want me to do this genealogy for this thing, they've got it all written out here on a gravestone. It was like a genealogist's dream for a gravestone. So I finally found Brad's grave, and I literally fell to my knees, even though the ground was wet, and cried because I thought I had lost him again. And it was a tough visit, because last year, for some reason, with the 5th anniversary, was really hard for me last year. But when I found his grave, it was more tears of relief and then tears of horror that I'd forgotten where he was buried. So it was not a good visit that day. So I didn't really go wandering around to see, just to check out new graves and all of that sort of stuff. Because when you've been to cemeteries several times, you always go and look to see who the new ones are. The little town that we grew up in New Zealand, the longest place I ever lived in New Zealand, was in Waitara, and we would walk down our backyard, then up the hill, through the fence, and it was just a couple of strands of wire that was there. The top two were broken. Through the fence, and the hedge went this way, and there was a gap, and you'd come out on this gap onto Mr. and Mrs. Elliott's grave, because I always apologized every time I stood on their grave to get in and out of the cemetery for standing on their grave. And every time Mum and Dad are in the area, they go by the cemetery and they go down the new area to see who has passed since they last visited. And with Dad being the local traffic cop and Mum working in the doctor's surgery, they basically knew probably just about everybody that ever lived in the town during the time that we were there. So they were able to go and see, if anybody that they knew had passed since they'd last been there. So it's always fun. And then visiting ancestors' graves. I love visiting ancestors' graves. I have visited grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and it's just because, I wouldn't be here without them. So it's paying that respect to them. And Katie's written here, I like visiting old cemeteries and paying my respects and wonder about what their lives were like. Exactly. Yeah. And through family history and research and stuff, you can get a glimpse into their life during that time. There's those family stories that get passed down through generations, but there's also things, different records that you can go and look at, like different societies and organization, church records, school records, here in the States, Social Security records. And I will tell you this, here is a little secret that some people may not know, but if you go to the Social Security Death Index, you can find the person there who has passed. But if you go to the Social Security claims and application and claims thing, that one gives you a little more detail. Not only does it give you the name of the person, it gives you their birth date, their death date, their parents' names, and what names they were known as throughout their life and the dates that they changed. So if, for example, if a woman gets married and then later gets divorced and then gets remarried or something, it will all be recorded there on her Social Security form, but you can only find it on the claim application and claims records, that you'll have that much detail. On the index, just said, this is the person, this is when they were born, this is when they died, and this is where they were last known of living. But if you get that applications and claims one, and I will tell you this, be prepared for shocks when you read some of these, because some of them will show that somebody may have been adopted, and it will have the name that they were given at the time, and then suddenly their name changes. They're suddenly known as this. I have had that happen with clients. Other times I have found out that that for a family, and this was a hard one, because it was like, do I tell them, do I not tell them, because it really would have upset them, because it's like, oh no, they claimed that their mother had only been married once, and that their dad was her first love and blah, 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 and all this, da, 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 da. And when we found the claims, the application and claims, Social Security application and claims record, it turned out she'd been married twice before, and none of the kids knew that she'd been married before. So yeah, that one was a bit of a shock for them as well. So just be cautious when you're looking at some records that there will be shocks there. So what's some other fun things you can discover at cemeteries too? When you are visiting cemeteries, there may be different graphics or symbols that are on different tombstones that mean different things. It could be they belong to a certain society. Like I know the Freemasons have their Freemasons logo goes on some of them. If they were in World War I or World War II, they may have insignia on there for what they for the services they represented if they are not buried in a military cemetery. Some of them may have their collegiate school emblem on their tombstone. There could be, what else could there be? There could be anything there that symbolizes that, or all the symbols on there have meanings. If you're not sure what the image on there is about, like a logo or something like that, make sure you always take pictures of tombstones, not just the fronts, the sides and the back as well. Sometimes on the back there could be more information also. But especially if there's logos, take close-ups of it, clear close-ups, so that you can, when you go back to the cemetery office and go, hello, this is my great-grandmother's my great-grandfather's tombstone, and there's a symbol on there. Do you know what that means? They may be able to tell you. If not, you could probably look it up online. There's a whole place that you can go. And especially in military cemeteries, you will find coins on different people's heads, on different headstones and stuff. And don't quote me on this, but if I remember, a penny, if you leave a penny, it's that you were just visiting, you may or may not have known the person. Then the nickel is like if you served with, or a boot camp with them or something. The higher up the coinage goes, the closer you were to that person. And I know that there's a list available online, and you will see the coins sitting on top of the tombstones, just as people know, and you can look at them and know that, oh, there were people that actually served with my spouse, my brother, my uncle, my grandfather, my parents, whatever, that served with them. And you can tell by the coins whether they were people just paying respects, or if they served with them at some point. And I think a quarter, if I remember correctly, with a quarter, it is you were there when they passed. Like you may have been like on the team that may have been attacked or something like that, and they died from injuries or something like that. And you put the quarter, and I think it's the quarter, but don't quote me on that. Please look it up online, because I really don't want to get that one wrong, because I love my military dudes and gals. I have a long list of military in my family, as well as serving myself. So I have the utmost respect for them, and I don't want to get that one screwed up. I should have looked it up before I came online. But look for those symbols as well. And even on the children's, on the hard ones are the babies ones, the babies and the infants. Those are the hardest ones, and the toddlers. And sometimes they'll have little symbols on there that shows that they were one of twins, or they were part of a multiple birth. The one that passed is part of a multiple birth. So you've got those symbols as well. But the cool part is that most stone, and if you come across one that has a single name on the front, like they've got the big tombstone there, and it has the single name across the front, walk to the back of it, because on the back it might just have the family name across the top. Walk to the back of it, because it may have a list on the back as to who is buried in there, who is in the plot, and that's where you'll find the inscription. So the front side will be the name, and on the back is who's in there. I was actually watching Kelly Clarkson's Who Do You Think You Are? I tell you, that is one of my favorite shows to watch. And she went and visited her third great grandfather's grave, and the last name was Rose. And as she's walking into the cemetery, there's like a rose here, there's another rose over there, and she says she was just walking through this field of roses until she found the one. And on her one, it had Rose on the front, and she had to go to the back to see her third great grandfather's name and his wife's name engraved on the back of the tombstone. But it was really cool. She says, I'm walking through there, and they're everywhere. And she says they were everywhere. These are all my relatives that are in here. which is kind of cool when you go to an area where you know that your family came from, and you happen to go to a cemetery and you're finding all these people's last names. If you find them all with the same last name and you wonder if they're related to you, take photographs of them, fronts and backs, or just the so that you can refer back to them and do that research again later when you get back to find out is that person related to our family, and how. Excuse me. Because, and then go to the office and ask for the plot records for those particular plots. You may find that one person purchased several plots that's become a family plot area, for the future family and all of that sort of thing as well. So those are just some of the things that you can find in cemeteries. But for me, I just love walking around them. They are peaceful. They're incredible. And some of the stories behind some of the people that are there. There's a few people on TikTok that when they actually go to old cemeteries and they clean the headstones. But what they do while you're watching the video of them cleaning the headstone is they're doing a voiceover telling the story about that person who is buried there, whose gravestone that they're cleaning at the time. And they will show you what it looks like before, during, and after, and you get to hear the stories. And some of the stories are just incredible. Some of them are like a town hero that nobody knows about. Or somebody could be, they've sort of got they had this black cloud living over their house because they were under suspicion for whatever it was they were under suspicion for. Was it being a serial killer? Was it, even being a witch? Things like that during the witch trials and all that sort of stuff. I remember going to Williamsburg one year. My husband and I and his youngest Josh, we went to Williamsburg. We had Christmas. No, it was just the three of us, and we had a blast there. We got this week-long pass for Williamsburg, and it meant we could come and go to all of these different things. And we were actually at one of the ones we got to do was the court cases. You got to go hear some famous court cases that were tried in Williamsburg, and back in the day, back in the 1700s. And so the first night we got there was a few people in front of us, and we weren't sure how this all worked, but we went in there, and we were sitting in the jury seats. And so I was looking at this going, okay, so those that came in before us, they're up there in that horseshoe-shaped thing. We've got the judge, and then he's got people sitting on either side of him. And so when we went and looked at the timetable, we saw that, and that one was a funny one. That was about pirates. And the banter going backwards and forwards between the ex-lovers was hilarious. And they were trying to try them for piracy or something like that, but they kept confusing everybody with this banter going backwards and forwards. You didn't know who was responsible for what, who was telling the truth or anything, but it was hilarious. The next night we went back, and it was a witch trial. We didn't, and so we made sure we got there early, so we got in the front seats. And I was sitting next to the judge. Then there was Brad, and then there was Josh, and so we're up there on this horseshoe-shaped thing, looking down, watching the trial and that. And it was about this woman who's been tried as a witch. And it was a very interesting story, and a lot of stuff came out. And of course, they found her guilty. I pled not guilty. I said she wasn't guilty. But then I was using modern day thinking. I wasn't using thinking from back in the 1700s, when the 1700s, 1800s, 1600s when it took place. But what was interesting was a few months later, I happened to be glancing through, I think it was one of the newspaper, I think it was the Washington Post, happened to be glancing through that. And this article caught my attention about this woman had been pardoned. And it was something about the governor had pardoned this woman. And I read the article, and it was the governor, like 400 years later, was pardoning this woman that we had seen the trial of while we were in Williamsburg. So there was a very interesting story behind that. And then it also had sort of like what had happened to her after the trial, because she was never burned it. So she actually went on to live into her 80s. But she was always under this cloud of being a witch for the rest of her life. And so she just basically hid herself away from people and very rarely was seen out in public after she was convicted, because it was after she was convicted that they stopped burning the witches at the stake and executing them. So she was a very interesting thing. And had we gone to a cemetery there and seen that, that would have been a very interesting story to go, oh, well, she lived to that age and you want to go and dig some more. But this newspaper article closed that loop for us, and the fact that, over 400 years later, she was pardoned by the governor of Virginia. And I'm like, well, it would have been nice if they'd done it while she was alive. But anyway, So, you can come across some amazing stories at cemeteries. Some name may catch your attention, and it just might be an unusual name, or there could be something about the gravestone, just something that may be engraved on the tombstone that you turn around and go, that's interesting. And so you take photos of it, you write down the details, and you go away and investigate the person. Well, investigate. You go and research the person, and you may come up with some great story or something like that. You never know. But always go looking, especially go looking for relatives and ancestors and things like that, and pay respects to them, because without them you wouldn't be here. So just think about that, because we are not forging new paths. We are following the paths that our ancestors have already laid out before us. So that's it from me for tonight. Have a super fantastic, sparkling evening. If you want something interesting to do, go browse the local cemetery. You never know what you'll find. And we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Hey, Konera.